When someone we love dies, our hearts may break. And now new research suggests that this phrase might be taken literally. The study found that a person's heart may break due to grief, which could lead to death in the 10 years after the death of a loved one. But what exactly does the science say? Let's delve into the details. You can actually die of a broken heart. If you're grieving and feel devastated over the death of your partner, family member, or friend, then chances are your heart is heavy with sorrow. But did you know that you could actually die of a broken heart? A recent study published in the journal Frontiers in Public Health has shown that bereaved relatives who experienced high levels of grief were more likely to die in the 10 years following their bereavement than those who experienced low levels of grief. In the study, co-author Mette Kierkegaard Nielsen, a postdoctoral researcher at Aarhus University in Denmark, and her colleagues investigated the long-term health outcomes of bereaved relatives in Denmark over the course of 10 years. To do this, the team divided the 1,735 participants into two groups, those who experienced low levels of grief and those who experienced high levels of grief. So what did they find? Well, during the study period, 26.5% of the relatives who showed high levels of grief died, compared with only 7.3% of those who were less powerfully affected. This difference was even significant after taking account of potential confounding variables, such as age, gender, pre-existing health conditions, and cause of death. Now let's take a closer look at the study design. The participants in this study were followed for 10 years, which is a pretty long time to conduct a study. This allowed the researchers to see how the level of grief someone experiences right after they lose someone close to them changes over time. The participants were asked to fill in questionnaires when they first enrolled in the study, as well as 6 months and 3 years after their bereavement, allowing researchers to track their symptoms over time. The researchers also looked at how often the participants used a health care system. What they found was that relatives with high grief symptoms also used more antidepressant medication, mental health services, and primary care services. So the study found that people who grieve a lot after losing someone close to them are not only more likely to die sooner, but also more likely to use healthcare services. Now you might be wondering how grief is measured in this study. Well, it's not as simple as just asking someone how sad they feel. Instead, the researchers used a validated questionnaire to measure the symptoms of grief. The questionnaire asks about common reactions to loss, such as feeling emotionally numb or that life is meaningless. The researchers then grouped participants based on their responses, dividing them into those with low levels of grief and those with high levels of grief. But the study doesn't end there. Researchers also looked at the causes of death in both groups. Unfortunately, the study found that the majority of deaths occurred in people with high levels of grief, particularly from circulatory system diseases such as heart disease and stroke. However, it is important to note that the study did not directly link these deaths to the level of grief experienced by the individuals. Furthermore, the study found that the association between high grief and death was stronger in men than in women. This suggests that men may be more vulnerable to the negative health effects of grief than women. However, the study does not explain why this is the case, and further research would be needed to understand the underlying mechanisms. Despite these limitations, the study makes an important contribution to our understanding of the impact of grief on physical health. Previous research has shown that grief can have a significant impact on mental health, but this study provides evidence that it can also affect physical health and potentially lead to death. So what should you do if you are grieving? Well, the first step is to allow yourself to grieve. Grief is a natural response to loss, and it is important to allow yourself time to process your emotions. This may include feeling sad, angry, guilty, or confused. All of these feelings are valid and should be allowed to surface. Another important thing to do is to reach out for support. This could be in the form of friends, family members, or mental health professionals. Talking about your grief can help you process it and move forward. In fact, the study highlights the importance of monitoring grief levels, as those with high levels of grief may require additional support. It's also important to take care of your physical health. This means eating healthy foods, getting regular exercise, and getting enough sleep. It may be difficult to do so when you're grieving, but it's important to try. Physical activity has been shown to have a positive impact on mental health and can help you cope with the stress of grief. Finally, it's important to be patient with yourself. Grief is a process and it takes time to heal. There is no right or wrong way to grieve, and there is no set timeline for the grieving process. Be patient with yourself and allow yourself the time you need to heal. If you're worried that you may be developing complicated grief, then it's important to seek professional help. Complicated grief is when the grieving process becomes prolonged and intense. This can make it difficult to function normally and can lead to a range of negative emotions. Fortunately, there are effective treatments available for complicated grief, so don't hesitate to reach out for help if you need it. Now, you might be wondering what happens when someone experiences a sudden and unexpected loss, such as the death of a spouse, child, or close friend. In these cases, the individual may go through a different grieving process known as anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is when a person begins to grieve before the loss occurs. For example, a person who knows that their spouse is terminally ill may begin to grieve the loss of their spouse before they die. So what happens to the heart when someone goes through anticipatory grief? Well, the answer is still not fully understood. However, some studies suggest that people who experience anticipatory grief may be more likely to develop heart disease or have a heart attack. One possible explanation is that the stress of anticipating a loss can cause the body to release hormones that increase the risk of heart disease. It's important to note that not everyone who experiences anticipatory grief will develop heart problems. However, it is a risk factor that should be considered. If you are going through anticipatory grief, it is important to take steps to reduce your risk of heart disease. This includes maintaining a healthy diet, getting regular exercise, and managing any other risk factors for heart disease, such as high blood pressure or diabetes. Talking to a therapist or counselor may also be helpful in processing the grief and developing healthy coping mechanisms. Overall, the relationship between grief and heart health is complex and not fully understood. However, the evidence is clear that grief can have a profound impact on a person's overall health. Allowing yourself to grieve, reaching out for support, taking care of your physical health, and being patient with yourself are all important steps in coping with grief. If you are struggling to cope with the death of a loved one, please reach out for help. Talking to a mental health professional can be immensely beneficial in processing your grief and developing healthy coping mechanisms. There are also resources available online and in communities that can provide support and guidance during this difficult time. Remember, you're not alone and there is help available. Can grief really kill you? Well, the answer appears to be yes. A recent study has found that people who experience high levels of grief after a major loss may be more likely to die in the following 10 years. While the exact mechanism is still unknown, the study suggests that grief can have a profound impact on physical health, potentially leading to death. So what should you do if you're grieving? Allow yourself to grieve, reach out for support, take care of your physical health, and be patient with yourself. With time and support, you can work through your grief and honor the memory of your loved one in a healthy way. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. And remember to subscribe for more updates on science and technology.